Hi, and welcome back to Alignment by Tuva. Today's chat is one that I think is going to land very specifically for a very specific kind of person. It is the kind of person who is in transition, who has left something, like a job, a chapter, or just a version of themselves. And this is someone now standing in that uncomfortable space between what was and what is coming next. They just know they want something more, but not really what that is yet. And they do everything they can to make it look like they have it all together, while underneath the uncertainty is very loud. And by the end of today, you will have a framework for identifying the one project, not five, not a list, one. One project that is generally purpose adjacent for where you are right now. And you will understand the neuroscience for why that single project might be the most important thing you can do for your nervous system while everything else is still finding its shape. I want to start with something personal, and I'm going to ask you to stay with me through it because I think you are going to recognize yourself in it. For about 7 years, I worked in corporate, like 7 years. And I want to be honest about what that felt like from the inside, because from the outside, it looked fine. It looked very stable. It looked like the thing that you are supposed to do when you are building a life. Good salary, structure, a title that made sense when someone asked what you were doing. But inside, I was restless in a way I didn't have words for yet. There was just this low-grade hum of emptiness that I got very good at managing. I was super productive, I was competent, and yeah, I showed up and I delivered. But I felt nothing. Not depressed. Nothing is more nuanced than that. I felt like I was running an engine that was pointed in the wrong direction. Like I was burning real fuel, making real noise, going nowhere that mattered to me. And here is what I did with that feeling, because I think this is the part that you will recognize. I started things on the side while keeping the job. I started a project and then another one. And then I started another project. At one point, I had 5 different things running simultaneously. I had 5 attempts at something that felt more like me. A creative project, a coaching idea, a content concept, or something wellness related. Just something that let me use a different part of my brain. And on the surface, it looked like ambition. It looked like someone who had a lot of ideas and a lot of energy and was going after things. But underneath, if I'm just being completely honest with you, I was scattered. Each project got a fraction of my attention. None of them really went anywhere meaningful. And after each one quietly faded, I felt more confused. I didn't feel less confused. I felt more empty and less purposeful because I was doing a lot of doing without any of it actually landing. And it took me a long time to understand what was actually happening. And what I eventually came to understand through lived experience and also through the science is that I did not have a purpose problem. I was not someone who lacked direction or passion or something worth building. I had a signal problem. I could not hear what actually lit me up, clearly with conviction, because I had spent 7 years in a context that required me to override that signal constantly. I prioritized what was safe over what was true, and what was practical over what was alive. And the result was a nervous system that had essentially learned to distrust its own responses. A system that had so many tabs open, it could no longer hear the single frequency that mattered. And the solution was not more projects. It was one project chosen with precision, and so I could give it everything that I had. So let me give you this science underneath what is actually happening when you are in this in-between very uncomfortable place. When you leave a role, like a job or a relationship or a chapter of life that gave you structure and identity, your nervous system loses something that it was using in a very specific way. Psychologists call it a schema. Neuroscientists might talk about predictive coding. I am going to call it what it actually feels like. Your system loses its map. because your brain is a prediction machine. It is constantly using past experience to model what comes next, so that it can prepare your body, your attention, and your resources in advance. This predictive function is energy efficient. It is stabilizing, and it is the reason that familiar environments and routines feels so settling for the nervous system. Your nervous system knows what to expect. It knows what comes next. And that knowing at a very deep level feels like safety. When that map disappears, when the structure, the role, the daily rhythm that anchored your identity is suddenly gone, your predictive system has nothing to work with. It cannot model what comes next because the data it was using no longer applies. And a nervous system without a map reads that as a freefall. Not metaphorical freefall, physiological freefall. Your threat detection system, the amygdala, the sympathetic branch of your autonomic nervous system, activates in response to unpredictability the same way it activates in response to physical danger. Because to your brainstem, unpredictability is danger. It always has been. From an evolutionary perspective, not knowing what comes next was life-threatening. So what does a system in freefall do? It grabs. It looks for anything that provides the sensation of ground or of structure, something forward motion. And this is why, if you have been in transition, you probably recognize some version of this. You update your resume before you know what you are updating it for. You scroll for hours in a way that feels like research, but produces nothing. Or you start a new project, but not because you're clear on it, but because the starting feels like progress. You stay busy on the surface, while underneath, nothing is actually shifting. This is a nervous system doing the only thing it knows how to do when the map is gone. Find something, anything, that creates a sensation of direction. The problem is that when we are in this reactive survival mode state, when the amygdala is running the show and the sympathetic nervous system is activated, we do not have full access to the part of the brain that can actually help us, the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for self-knowledge, for discernment, for the ability to distinguish between what generally matters to us and what simply feels urgent. That part goes partially offline under chronic stress and uncertainty, which means the decisions you make about what to build, like what to pursue, or what project to commit to, when you make them from inside the freefall state, they are being made with compromised access to your own inner knowing. You're trying to find your signal in the middle of static. And this is the root of what I call the signal problem. It is not that your purpose doesn't exist. It is that the conditions inside your nervous system are making it almost impossible to hear clearly. And the solution is not to think harder or research more or start another thing. The solution is to first create the conditions in which the signal can be heard, and then, and only then, to choose the one project that is genuinely yours. I want to introduce a concept that I think reframes the whole conversation around purpose and transition. I call it the identity bridge. When you are between chapters, when the old identity has ended and the new one has not yet arrived, your nervous system needs something to attach to because you are wired for continuity, for rhythm, for a sense of self that persists across time. That is not a personal quirk. That is fundamental human neurobiology. An identity bridge is a project, one project that serves a very specific function during this period. It is not primarily about output, though output will come, and it is not about success, although success, it will follow, but the primary function is to give your nervous system a place to land every single day, a consistent point of return, something that is completely yours, that exists outside of the uncertainty that you can show up to regardless of what else is unresolved. And here is why this works as a physiological level. So consistent Purposeful action on something that genuinely engages you, it triggers dopamine release in the mesolimbic pathway, which is the brain's reward and motivation system, not the shallow part where dopamine comes from scrolling or checking a notification. This is the deeper, more sustained dopamine of working towards something meaningful. This type of dopaminergic activity has a very specific effect. It begins to re-engage the prefrontal cortex. It pulls your system out of the reactive, survival-oriented mode and back into the creative and self-directed mode, where your best thinking and your clearest knowing becomes accessible again. In other words, the right project does not just give you something to do, it changes the neurochemical environment in which you are making every other decision in your life. It creates the internal conditions for clarity, for direction, for the signal to come through. But, and this is a critical piece, it has to be the right project. Not 5 projects, not the impressive sounding project, not the safe project that you can easily explain to people. The one that genuinely lights you up. The one that makes you lose track of time. The one that when you think about doing it tomorrow, something in you settles, okay? 5 projects, it scatters the signal. It keeps your nervous system in a state of partial engagement with everything and full engagement with nothing. And partial engagement does not produce the neurochemical shift we are talking about. It just replicates in a slightly more creative form the same freefall you were already in. One project chosen well and given everything you have, that is what becomes the bridge. That is the thing that holds you while the rest of your life finds its shape. So how do you find it? How do you identify the one project that is genuinely purpose adjacent, not just another thing you are starting to fill the silence? I want to give you a framework, 4 questions, and I want to be honest with you about how to use these questions. These are not questions you answer quickly in your head. These are questions you actually sit with, you write about them, and you let your body respond to as much as your mind. Because remember, your signal lives in the body. It always has. The goal is to hear it, not to think your way into it. Question number 1, what have you done for free with no audience, with no outcome, that made time disappear? Not what other people have told you you are talented at, and not what makes sense as a business or a brand or a career pivot. What have you done, even once, even years ago, where you looked up and 2 hours has passed and you had not even noticed it? Where the doing itself was the reward before any external validation arrived. This is what psychologist Mihaly called flow, the state of optimal engagement where challenge and skill are matched so precisely that self-consciousness just dissolves. And flow is one of the most reliable signals your nervous system has for genuine purpose alignment. It is your system saying, this is where I am most myself. And the answer to this question might actually surprise you. It might be something you have dismissed as a hobby or as impractical or as not serious enough to build a life around. Stay with it. Write it down. This is a signal. Question 2. What problem do you find yourself thinking about even when no one asks you to? Purpose is often not about passion in the way that word gets used, like the glittery, always exciting, and you never doubt yourself. Purpose is more often about obsession, about the thing you cannot stop to think about. You cannot stop seeing it anywhere, and you cannot stop wanting to understand it or to solve it or even to share it. So what conversations do you find yourself gravitating toward when you sit and talk to someone at a dinner table? Or what topics do you read about, not because they are useful, but because you cannot help yourself reading about them? What problem, when you hear someone struggling with, makes you feel immediately activated? And not just sympathetic, but capable, like you have something to say there. For me, it was the nervous system, the gap between what people knew intellectually about their own well-being and what they were actually experiencing in their bodies. I cannot stop reading about it. I cannot stop wanting to talk about it. And that is just an obsession that predated the platform for years, and the platform was just the vehicle it eventually found. So, what is your obsession? Not your passion, your obsession. the thing that will not leave you alone. Question 3. Who do you most want to help? And what do you most want them to feel? This question moves us out of the self and into the service. And I want to be precise about the way I'm asking this. So not what do you want to offer? Not what is your product or your service? Who is the specific person you most want to reach? You can close your eyes and see them. And what do you want them to feel as a result of what you create? Not think. What do you want them to feel? Because purpose adjacent projects, they have a directional quality to them. They are pointed at someone. They carry an intention that goes beyond the work itself and into the impact it creates in another human being. And when you can feel that intention clearly, when you can sense the person on the other end of what you're building, your nervous system gets a second hit of that purposeful dopamine we talked about. Not just from the making, but from the meaning of who it reaches. Get very specific here. Not everyone, not women everywhere. The specific person in the specific moment of their life, feeling the specific thing you most want to give them. That is not limiting, it is clarifying. And clarity is what nervous system has been hungry for. Question 4, what would you build if you already knew it would work? This is the one that tends to just crack things open because most people, when they are stuck in transition, are not actually unclear about what they want to build. They are afraid of what it would mean to commit to it, to say it out loud, to give it everything and find out whether it is real. The uncertainty of transition is not just logistical, it is identity level. You are leaving behind a version of yourself that had a clear shape, a clear name, a clear space in the world. And the new version, the one that builds the thing that actually lights you up, doesn't have that yet. It is still forming. And committing to the project means committing to that forming version of yourself before you can prove to anyone, including yourself, that it is valid. So I want you to ask yourself, if the outcome were already guaranteed, if you already knew it would work, that it would reach people, that it would sustain you, what would you build? Whatever came up for you just now, without the fear in the way, that is your signal. That is the one. And here's what I want to tell you about that fear that might come up. It does not mean that you're wrong. It means you care. It means that the project is close enough to the real you that if failure happened, that would actually mean something. That is not a reason to walk away from it. That is a reason to take it seriously. Once you have your answer, once the 4 questions have pointed you somewhere specific, I want to talk about how to begin. Because beginning from inside the freefall stage requires a different approach than beginning from a place of stability and clarity. The most important thing I can tell you is that do not wait for clarity to begin. Clarity does not arrive before the doing. Clarity arrives through the doing. And this is not motivational language. This is how the nervous system actually works. Action, even imperfect, even uncertain, even done badly at first, it generates feedback. And feedback is information. And information is what your predictive brain uses to build that new map. So every time you show up to the project, you give your nervous system a data point. You give your nervous system a small piece of evidence that forward motion is possible, that there is ground here, that the free fall is not permanent. And those data points accumulate slowly, then quickly, until one day you realize that the static has quieted and the signal has become the loudest thing in the room. So here is how to begin. This week, you are not launching anything. You're not building anything. You're doing one thing. You're answering the 4 questions, honestly, slowly, on paper, with your phone in another room, so that you're giving your nervous system the quiet it needs to hear itself. And then you're choosing one, not the impressive one, not the safe one, the one that when you imagine showing up to it every single day for the next year, something in you just says yes. And not the loud, certain yes, like, whoo, no, a quiet one. It's a steady yes. It's a kind of yes that does not need external permission to exist. That is your identity bridge. That is your project. That is where you begin. And I want to close this off with something that I hope lands the way I mean it. You are not lost. You are between. And between is not a failure state, it is a transition state. A physiological, neurological, deeply human experience of moving from one version of yourself to another. The discomfort you feel is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is the sensation of becoming. You do not need to have it figured out yet. You do not need to have clarity before you begin. You need one project, genuinely, specifically, uncompromisingly yours. And you need to show up to it every single day, while everything else is still finding its shape. The signal is there. It has always been there. You just need the conditions to hear it. Go answer the 4 questions and then come find me on Instagram at Alignment by Tuva and tell me what came up for you. I read every single message and I genuinely want to know what your one project is. And if this episode spoke to you, share it with someone who is in that in between right now. You know exactly who they are. And until next week, stay aligned, stay curious, and most important of all, stay true to yourself.